Okay, I'm Steph Yu, for the record, the Executive Director of Public Assets Institute. And I want to just kind of go through a couple things quickly. And I guess I'll start with saying that I want to provide our ideas to fix the income sensitivity thresholds. It's pretty straightforward, it's easy to implement, and it would provide immediate property tax relief for income families. But I also want to talk about why we think income-based school taxes do make sense permanently over the long haul, and how to also kind of do it in stages in a gradual way that feels probably more reasonable than kind of trying to do it all at once. And then I want to share some quick concerns about the plans coming from the governor and the House about the foundation system and the homestead exemption structure. But I do just want to, because the bill, I think, is there's some placeholder stuff in the bill and it's not totally final. I think that there's also, I just want to say what vision we're talking about when it comes to the income-based school taxes. Our vision has always been just for the homestead taxes, right? So all the other revenue sources we stay the same, the non-homestead, the sales tax, however you look at that. And our vision also assumed that we'd set the income rates the way we do now. So with the yield and all of those pieces, meaning that we would be starting just like we do reporting each year. So that we're raising whatever revenue is needed to support the school budgets. So whatever volatility there is in the personal income tax wouldn't apply in the system because we'd be updating it as it works now. But I also just want to briefly talk about, we've been having a lot of community meetings. We've been invited to a lot of community meetings around the state and having conversations with Vermonters. We're hearing a lot of things about where people are on schools. And, I think it's worth saying that most people are not digging into the policy details of this to the extent that any of you are. But I think there's some consensus themes that we're hearing. So I'll go through those quickly. The first is that Vermonters do want richer Vermonters and second homeowners, whether they're Vermonters or out-of-staters, to pay more to support public education. So they don't think that middle income people should be paying a higher share of their income in school tax. The second thing is that they don't want forced consolidation and school closures. I think there's a lot of questioning, and I know this isn't sort of your area, but there's a lot of questioning about whether school consolidation saves money. And I think there's a lot of fear about losing community schools and a lot of frustrations that big towns also can sort of dictate what happens to the smaller town within the district. We're also hearing that Vermonters don't want more cuts to schools, that they don't want more vouchers, they don't want to expand the use of public money in private schools. And I think the positive version of this is that Vermonters want all kids to have access to good schools, and they want to protect what they love about their local schools. So I want to jump to what we see as the two most pressing problems in education funding in Vermont. And this has come up already today quite a bit, but in our minds, the two most pressing problems are the unfairness of who pays school taxes and the cost drivers that are out of district's control. Both those that are across the board that pretty much hit all school districts in a similar way, and also those cost drivers that hit some districts much harder than others.
Hey, look, you just used the word unfairness in who pays for schools. The emails I've been getting is that second homeowners are paying for schools. Senior citizens are paying for schools, and none of us send kids to the schools. So who determines what is fair?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I think this is our definition of what we see as the unfairness. But I will say that I think if in the Brigham decision, they're pretty specific that public education is public good that benefits everybody, whether you have kids in school or not. Right. And that it's a collective responsibility to pay for that. So, I think that's part of the debate here. What's unfair, what's fair, what's the best way to do this? And this is sort of our assessment of what's the fair way. So
are you advancing slides?
No, I'm not advancing. Okay, I'm not yet. I'm just warming up to it.
Got it. All right.
Okay. So two most pressing problems. What we see is the ways in which who pays school taxes are unfair, and those cost drivers that don't hit school districts similarly, right? So there's the distribution of costs and the distribution of taxes are unfair and uneven, particularly things like student mental health care or extraordinary special ed costs, in some districts harder than others. And changing the number of districts we have or having the state decide how much everyone spends don't fix either of those problems. So our main focus has always been on how we pay for schools. We've been working on education finance for more than 20 years. And I think you've all seen this before. This is, this was that one of those slides this was sort of visual of one of the slides that Patrick showed, which is that the current taxes are regressive, right? So moderate and middle income Vermonters pay a bigger share of their income in school taxes than the highest income Vermonters. The second thing, which I think I talked about, again, February does feel like a long time ago, but I think we talked a little bit about the cliffs that we see in the system that cause these big jumps in tax bills from one year to the next for a lot of low and moderate income Vermonters. And this is really because the income sensitivity thresholds have gotten out of whack. So this is how it works now. The 40, and I'll run through this quickly. You can look at all the details of this plan on our site, or I'm happy to send more material maybe it's helpful. But that $47,000 income threshold and the $90,000 income threshold haven't been changed in decades. $47,000, where the circuit breaker cuts out, hasn't changed since 1985, and the $90,000 hasn't been changed since 2008. So that's 17 years. So what happens is that even when school spending doesn't go up and a district budget doesn't change, a family can see this big jump from one year to the next in their tax bill because they cross one of those income thresholds. So for $1 more in income, suddenly they're paying $1,600 more in school taxes. And again, because those thresholds haven't changed, and because people's property values and income keeps going up, more and more Vermonters are falling into these cliffs.
Okay, that under 47 also includes local taxes.
Well,
It's your total property tax burden. I've tried to change that and been told that my local towns would be really angry because so you assume that in that number part, your local property taxes will go up because they will need to make up that revenue.
so this is just the school tax portion of the bill, but I will say
school tax.
But the circuit breaker is now split into two pieces, right? There's a separate
No, it's
piece for
one, but it is your total, not above that, it's your property taxes. It was 35,000, includes all your property taxes, which includes your local property tax.
right. So it's based on those pieces, but there is this cap on the municipal piece and the cap on the school piece. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I will say our proposal is to basically update those thresholds for inflation so that income sensitivity is back to where it used to be. And this is the recommendation again. So update that 47 to 60,000 by adding a step to the circuit breaker, capping it at 2.5% of income or the town income rate, whatever is lower. Updating that 90,000 for inflation to about, which would be about 130,000. And then I will say those property value thresholds also were lowered in 2018 during a lot of the tax reform process in order to get sort of more taxes out of the low and moderate income piece of this. So that's the general idea of, so this is sort of a short-term plan. This could provide immediate tax relief to FY26. I want to talk a little bit about why we think that income-based taxes make sense for the long-term sort of a permanent move. But before I do that, I just want to say, I think the yield bill that you have from the House uses about 77 million in one-time money to buy down food for everybody in FY26. And our suggestion is to use that money to target the relief for those Vermonters paying the biggest share of their income in school taxes, which are those people facing the cliffs. So those low and moderate income people who have these, and we put together some matrices that sort of show the percentage that people pay at the different income levels and different property values.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Did you happen to see the governor's proposal for adjusting the income sensitivity rates and levels?
Well, I think what we're looking at from the governor's proposal and the House, and I'll get to this, is this homestead exemption approach. So starting with property value and then just taking a part of the property value off and not.
Do you agree with it, or?
I'll get to that a little bit, but generally we think anything that's starting with a property tax, the problem is that it perpetuates the regressivity in the current system. So once you cross whatever that threshold is, wherever the exemption phases out, you're back to this regressive tax system.
Okay, but I think what we saw was that a lot of lower income Vermonters are paying based on the property, not their income value, because their property is very low value. The might have a really nice double wide, but they depreciate very quickly. And if they have to pay based on their income, they will pay more.
So I think that there's going to be, there's going to be some quirks and some anomalies in any system. I think part of what, I can't remember if it was Jake or Patrick who pointed out this sort of 4% of folks, but that means 96% aren't in that boat, right? So I think it's about sort of what's an anomaly and what's really where a lot of people are. And so I think that with an income-based system, it's a fair system, it's a progressive system. Anytime we're looking at a tax policy and how progressive it is, we're looking at it based on income, based on the assumption that income is the best measure of ability to pay, which kind of brings me to the case we're making for income. This is what the Vermont tax structure concluded, that income is the best measure. It's not a perfect measure, right? And I completely agree with a lot of what I'm hearing today, which is that neither income nor primary home value gives you the full picture of somebody's total financial picture, right? Their net worth. And so it would be great if we could gather that information. And that might be the right interim step, right? Is to start gathering more of that information so that we do have this full picture. Because I think both Jake and I can provide examples of, what would happen to some people. But the question is, how many people are in that boat? And how much do we devise the system around where the majority of people are versus where the exceptions are? So I think that's part of the question. But I do want to just show you something else that I think is helpful. This is also something that the Tax Structure Commission did, but we did this, we updated this for more recent data. And what we're looking at here is whether primary home value gives you a good sense of people's ability to pay and how it relates to your net worth. And at the low end, your home value. So you're just looking at the home value. So the dark blue on the left is your home value. Then you've got your home value minus your mortgage. And obviously most people have a mortgage, so they don't. So I think there was a key phrase here that Patrick used, which is an asset that you own. But most people don't own their whole house. They own a part of their house. And that equity changes over time. And it changes based on how much money you put down, how far into your mortgage you are, all of those pieces. But at the bottom end, the primary home value, which is the measure here, can be over 10 times your net worth. And not only that, you could have a negative net worth because you have a mortgage and other debt. And that goes up all the way through about the 80th percentile of income, which is right around that 115,000, right? So even at the 80th percentile, the primary home value is actually more than your total net worth. It's more than your worth. So what is happening there is that by using the primary home value, we're really sort of punishing those people whose primary home is their main asset, which is most people, right? So
Even though some of them are income sensitized.
Some of them are income sensitized, right. So this is the argument for why we base so much on income, why we have income sensitivity in the first place, is that income is a better measure of somebody's ability to pay.
We have not adjusted the home value since the rise. I've tried to do that 3 years and we've gotten distracted. But we have not increased that home value. The Senate has traditionally fought to raise that and fought to raise the income level, because they are going up. And yes, that's out of whack at this point compared to where we were when we started.
So I think it's just worth noting that at the high end of the income scale, that's the only spot where your primary home value is actually a subset of your net worth, where it's not more than what your net worth is, right? So again, this is, there's exceptions to every rule, but this is sort of the big picture of where people land, and this is where the median is. And then the next point I would make is that the Vermonters with the most income don't pay school taxes based on income. So we've been looking at the income of just homeowners in Vermont, and the Vermonters paying school taxes based exclusively on property. This year the breaking point is about 115,000. Some years it's 130, 125,000. But so looking at the share of income that they hold above 125,000, they hold 60% of the income for homeowners in Vermont, 13 billion. Even though they're 30% of households, they hold 60% of the income. So by giving those higher income Vermonters the property option, and that is how the system works, right? You pay the lower of whichever it is. So, it's not that they're taking advantage, it's how the system is designed, that they pay the lower. but we're really letting the people with the most income off the hook on school taxes, and we're relying on those low and moderate income Vermonters to subsidize that tax rate. And as income inequality increases, we're allowing a bigger and bigger share of income not to be subject to school taxes. So,
Okay, I've got two.
I got a question on this slide.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question on this slide too. It's probably a non-starter, but I mean, why not keep our current system in this, sort of mirror the property tax sensitivity on the high income earners and have them pay a surcharge or whatever on their income?
I think there have been plans that have looked at that in the past, which is basically at a certain point, you go from paying the lower of the two options to paying the higher of the two options, which I think, is an option. I think what it doesn't do is it doesn't reduce the complexity of the system we have now, which choosing one or the other does allow you to reduce the complexity of the system we have now. And I think also part of what we want to think about here is, as long as that threshold doesn't stay fixed for 40 years, it could be a good option. If that threshold stays fixed for 40 years, then, it's going to get out of whack eventually, one way or the other.
I'm gonna write it down.
I just want to highlight one thing, that represents the 60,000 households, but the number of households that are making more than $1 million is like
Small.
100, so a really small box. And so even if we tax all those, that's not going to provide that much additional revenue because there's not that many really high earning individuals in Vermont.
This would be another great piece of data to get. This is one of the challenges here is, we don't have access to all this data. JFO and tax don't necessarily do this analysis every year. But the last time we looked at it, they did this analysis, which was a few years ago, maybe 2022, somewhere in there. But the estimate was that you'd pick up about 100 million, somewhere in that range, 100 million more from the high earners than you are now with the property funds. So again, to your point, the way the ed funding system works is that there is a shock absorber or self-balancing factor, right? So it's not that you'd raise more money, but you'd be shifting some of the cost upward. Okay? Just briefly, I think the cost drivers, you all already know this, it's been said already today that none of the governance changes or the structural changes get to the root of the cost driver problem, the healthcare, the mental health care. And so those are things that really have to get addressed, especially if you're contemplating this foundation system that goes to this one size fits all, but these costs aren't evenly distributed. And if healthcare costs keep growing faster than inflation, then a foundation amount that grows with inflation isn't going to cut it when school budgets are pretty personnel heavy, right? So I'll run through our concerns about what the proposals are coming out of the governor and the House, which is this homestead exemption model. And our main concern, again, is that it perpetuates the regressivity of the current system. Any system that starts with a property tax is going to be a regressive system. And I just want to show you a couple of kind of the visuals of what that looks like. So this is how the current system looks now. And this is so across the income values and across different percentiles of home value, this is what it looks like. So you see the big cliff in the middle, right? That's the cliff we're talking about. And then right around that 90,000 and where that income sensitivity phases out. But the proposed plan from the House, which I think I know you didn't get to the walkthrough today, but basically 95% of your, at a really low income and 95% of your home value is exempt from school taxes, then it phases out at about 115,000. So that I can't remember the exact numbers, but somewhere around 110, 115, only 10% of your value is exempt. And then and then the rest, everybody pays on 100% of the value, but it's still regressive, right? So that's the main issue. And I think, and under this homestead exemption idea, ability to pay, the best measure we have ability to pay, which is income, is no longer the main driver of the tax bill. So, I think this question came up, are people similarly situated if they have the same income, but their primary home values are different? And our argument is that the primary home value is not a good indication because, again, it's not a liquid asset. You don't own the whole thing. Your net worth might be considered to be lower than that. And so that's a challenge. So and the way it works now is everybody at the same income, if they have the same per pupil spending in their town and their income is below 90 and their home value is below 400,000, which is about 70% of the people who would get the property tax who are income sensitized now, right? They have the same bill. But under the homestead exemption plan, everybody who has an income of $80,000 about the same ability to pay, their bills would really range from about $2,000 to $3,200, depending on where their house value is. So it's a pretty big range of bills for people with the same ability to pay. And I think the other piece of the homestead exemption plan is just, again, you're holding harmless everybody above about, with the governor's plan, it's 125, with the House plan, it's 115. So you're really just shuffling the taxes around everybody under that number. So, you know, I think income sensitivity is still a better plan than really leaning into the property tax with this homestead exemption approach. But ultimately moving to income-based taxes if you plan again for all, and instead of the homestead tax. The other piece is, you know, I think you're talking a lot about the complexities of the system. It's certainly complex, and the homestead exemption really does retain all of the complexity, the complaints you get about the property tax, which is the disconnect between school tax bills and what happens, you know, at the CLA, the disconnect between bills and school budgets, and sort of all that. And it also kind of retains the complexity of our the current hybrid system, because it's based on sort of this interaction between your income and property values. So you still have that your income, property value, CLA, exemption levels, all these things. So I know there's sort of a lot of decisions.
There is a lot here, and you're going very fast. You talk even faster than I do. And I think that when we find out what the House finally does, we're going to need to sit down and look at their funding formula, and then at a slower pace, look at alternatives. And this might well be an alternative. If everybody agrees that the numbers are gonna work out, but I think, I know.
I was just wondering if Stephanie could speak to the fact that no other states do this and why that is, even the progressive states.
I'm happy to do that. So I think there's a lot of theories around this. I think a lot of it is just historical precedent, right? I think there is this very strong association between property taxes and school taxes. You move to a town, you expect that you're paying for your schools through your property taxes. I think because Vermont has this robust income sensitivity system already, you know, 2/3 of homeowners get some kind of income sensitized. It's not as big a leap for us as it would be for other states, but I think there is this really deep connection now, and some states don't have any tax. So that's part of it too. You know, a lot of states rely more heavily on property taxes than we do. And that's part of why, exactly, New Hampshire, Florida, that's part of why we have one of the least progressive, but not quite progressive, revenue systems in the country, because we have this income sensitivity. Like if you look at the ITEP report, if you break out the big three taxes, right? So income, consumption, and property, most people's property tax system is completely regressive. It looks like the sales tax slope, right? But ours doesn't, because of income sensitivity. It's more fair on the low end, but on the high end, it's still regressive. So I think you do, you know, so I think it's more historical precedent than anything else, I think. And I think a lot of people, you know, I think Patrick was speaking to this, that the general sense is that people want diverse taxes, right? So that if something does happen to one of the revenue systems, or one of the revenue, like we see the sales tax, either, you know, the bottom fall out during a pandemic, or it's jumped because suddenly there's, you know, more money in the system, that you want a little bit of balance. But I think that the tax study breakdown, we did a similar exercise in terms of how much we'd be shifting from the property tax to an income tax. And I think it depends on your definition, because that study really, I believe, and this was my understanding of it, is that study treated all homestead taxes as property taxes, including those that were income sensitized. So if you treat the income sensitized taxes as already an income tax, then the shift is much lower. But either way, you still have, I think, you know, people talk about it as a three-legged stool of the different types of taxes. So I think there's urge for diversity. But again, I think that is most states that have a less progressive tax system, and are sort of moving in a progressive way, they do that through a progressive personal income tax to offset the sort of baseline regressivity in both sales and property taxes. So that was the main points I wanted to talk about. I think it's just worth saying that sort of what we keep hearing is that people want property tax relief, and they don't want to sacrifice their schools and not pursue it. So I think, how the two most pressing problems, the cost drivers and the unfairness of the case, I don't think it's solved by a lot of these government changes, the foundation changes and the homestead exemption. But I also think that, there's a lot of smaller steps. You can get immediate property tax relief, and you can gather more, I think, good data about what is the whole picture? How do you get a better picture of people's net worth and what makes sense? And in the meantime, updating the income sensitivity threshold, I think, goes a long way for providing immediate relief for those people being hit the hardest by school projects.
Okay. I'm gonna have to wrap this one up. I'm gonna have you back. But we off my next witnesses for 15 minutes. Many questions at this point. I think it's gonna take a while. I think I'll ask Joint Fiscal to take a look at all the charts and graphs and see if they can help us understand how these interplay with ours. And maybe they have a better idea other than inertia is powerful. Why other states haven't gone to an income tax. The one part that we didn't talk about today was competitiveness. When you do the pillars of a tax code, and the reason we used to have a fifth tax rate, which was higher, and we worked to get that down because that was, even though your tax bill for most people was lower, it was that top bracket that got reported, and it was very discouraging for business or anybody because they all thought they were going to be paying a 9% tax, whatever it was, but it was in the nines, and we pressed those two, so we have a large top tax bracket, and it is still high in the scale of things. And it does, that's the other thing that's been used to balance this is, will a company come here if all your top executives are gonna have to pay twice as many taxes as they do somewhere else? And then there's New Hampshire, which is New Hampshire and California were the only two states that I could sell houses to people that didn't hyperventilate at the side of our property tax bills on the list. Those are the two states I know that were significantly higher. Thought we were great. So
I know we have to shift gears, but it is, it puts us in a tricky place, or at least I feel like I'm in a tricky place, is because I do have constituents who feel like this will solve all their problems. And you can't have that conversation without addressing the cost drivers, which is something that you've repeated, and I really appreciate that. And at the same time, we can't address the cost drivers if we're not willing to make some changes, and people don't seem to want to change anything either. So we're in a tough spot right now. But I do want to just caution people that there is no easy fix here, and there is no like panacea that's going to make it all better. As much as that would be nice.
I hear that, and I also think more data would help, and it might take time to get that more data.
And part of it may be figuring out what data we need, and that we can use help.
Well, yeah, in healthcare, sometimes we find out we have the data, but we don't have the people to interpret it, or
We don't know where it is.
we don't know where it is, or, yeah.
We are fixing healthcare, not to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think I want to go to Ag in the morning, because we're about manure and